Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullins, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
Thank you, Hiller. That was quite generous. I do appreciate it. Folks, look, when I was a DA investigator and I announced to Mr. Morrow, Doug Morrow, then DA, that I was going to law school, every lawyer and investigator in the office came to me and said, hey, you know who else left this office as an investigator and went on to law school? It was Hiller and Cheney Joseph. So having left that office to go to law school, I'm thinking, wow, what kind of pressure is that to put on a kid? Because, you know, following in the footsteps of folks like Hiller and Cheney is something that we as young lawyers should all aspire to do. Thank you again for having me. Rotary, it was an honor and a privilege to get the phone call and to receive the invitation to be here today. If I had known that Coach O would have preceded me in the speaking engagement, the call might have gone a little differently. I certainly would have accepted, but I might have maybe tried to negotiate my way into a better batting order. So bear with me, and I'll do my best to follow in his footsteps. I will say this though, on a personal note, the invitation to speak here today has, whether I like it or not, has increased my profile in a small segment of our society, and I'll tell you how that happened. This morning, I was on the way. It was about 6:45, 7 o'clock this morning. I was bringing my girls to school on the way to work. I have 3 daughters. They're 9, 10, and 11. That, not genetics, explains why I have a shiny head. On the way to school, and I could hear the necessary morning bickering, and it caught my attention because my girls were talking about this big head on a billboard. So I thought I needed to address it, and my oldest daughter, my 11-year-old, said, "Why are you on a billboard?" I explained what Rotary does, why it's good for our community, and why we were asked to be here today. I talked about the speakers from all walks of life in our community, and why it was important for us to share our information with you all. So then I told her who was last week's speaker. So now I've got her attention because my girls, like maybe many of you and some of your sons and daughters and grandchildren, are fans of the LSU football program. So I said, hey, guess who spoke last week? It was Coach O. And with a more serious demeanor than I've ever seen in that 11-year-old, she whipped around, looked at me and said, "Daddy, does that mean you and Coach O are equal?" I thought for just a second. I said, "Baby, that's exactly what it means." So all kidding aside, thank you all for having me. I want to dive right in because I know our time is limited. I want to talk to you a little bit about what we do in our office. I gave a presentation last week. Linda Lightfoot is here. She was kind enough to ask me to address a group last week. It was about a 2-hour and 15-minute presentation. I'm going to chop that up quite a bit and talk to you a little bit about our responsibilities and what we do, and in particular, a small slice of what we do in our criminal division. We as U.S. attorneys nationwide, and there are 93 of us, are statutorily required to prosecute criminal cases in each of our districts. We're more than just a criminal division, though. We are also tasked with the responsibility of prosecuting and defending civil cases in which the United States is a party. And then there's also a portion of what we do, which is recovering funds owed to the United States that are not able to be administratively forfeited. As all of you know, the Middle District of Louisiana is a 9-parish district. Many of us think about Baton Rouge when we talk about the U.S. Attorney's Office, but it's certainly bigger than just the city of Baton Rouge, though Baton Rouge is quite obviously the population center, and unfortunately in our business, it's also the center for some of the crime that we see. So it's Baton Rouge centric, but we're engaged in 8 other parishes surrounding Baton Rouge. So I want to talk to y'all, like I said, a little bit about the criminal division. Our office in total is made up of about 60 employees. About 60% of those employees are the criminal division. We've got prosecutors, support staff, paralegals, all of those similar types of employees that you would see in any other law office. Our criminal division is tasked with the responsibility of evaluating, investigating, and potentially prosecuting all manner of violations of federal criminal law. What we customarily and what you probably would recognize ordinarily pursue are federal firearms violations, civil rights violations, child pornography, of course, our organized crime and narcotics investigations, immigration cases. That sort of folds in broadly under our violent crime section. We've also got a white collar and fraud section that handles healthcare fraud, public corruption, identity theft, tax fraud, and several other areas of the federal criminal code. But what I really want to talk to you all about today is violent crime. You've heard it many, many times. You've heard it from Hiller. You've heard it from the sheriff and from the chief and from many others. But I'd like to give you our perspective, and in particular, on some level, my personal perspective. Virtually everything we do in our office, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, in the violent crime arena, it falls under the umbrella of what we call Project Safe Neighborhoods. It's a nationwide initiative. It may sound familiar to some of you. It's not a new initiative. It's something that was sort of reinvigorated about 2 years ago under then Attorney General Jeff Sessions and President Trump. It was essentially born out of what many of you remember from the 1990s as Project Exile. It was a federal violent crime initiative that was created in order to help the state and local prosecutors and law enforcement agencies with some gun violence in the capacity allowed by the federal statutes. So what is it? What's Project Safe Neighborhoods? I'll probably refer to it as PSN for short. As I said, it's a nationwide initiative simply that brings together federal and local law enforcement resources. Why? It's to combat the most pressing crime problems in our neighborhoods and in our district. It makes sense to do it that way. It's a tailored program for each community because obviously the Middle District of Louisiana is going to be different from the Southern District of Florida, Miami, or from Chicago or from New York. In fact, all of you know that Baton Rouge's crime issues may very well be different from another town in the Middle District. Watson's crime problems in Livingston Parish are going to be a little different from Baton Rouge. So PSN focuses on a sort of a tailored approach for each of the areas in the district that you want to cover. Case studies, and Hiller's very familiar with this, case studies by the Michigan State University School of Criminal Justice have shown over time, because we've got data from many years ago when it worked, that PSN cities, PSN programs, when working properly with the state and local local law enforcement officials, it works. It shows demonstrable results, and if you can sustain that program, it shows more significant decreases in violent crime over time. So we're very encouraged by the notion that then Attorney General Sessions reinvigorated the program, and I'm really excited about what we're doing here. So that's the next question. What are we doing? Our office, the criminal division itself, while we are obviously known for investigating and prosecuting criminal cases, we do on a wider scale, I think, more for violent crime than just prosecuting criminal cases. Obviously, we're heavily involved with Hiller's office, and I'll touch more on this a little later, in prosecuting illegal possessors of guns, so the felons in possession of firearms. Where we can have another big impact is in the area of organized crime and drug trafficking. One thing we do sort of outside the courtroom from our office's perspective is we can engage with local law enforcement in training, helping make law enforcement officers better at what they do to create a better product so that Hiller's office and all the other DAs in our district, and our office included, receives a better product when it's time to look at a file and potentially bring it to court. The big one, maybe I should have started with this, and Hiller touched on it, is money, right? It's federal funding. I had a nice conversation when I walked in this morning, and it went something like this. As long as I'm in this job, for any local law enforcement official who wants it and who will use it to benefit his or her community, I will stand up and support every single federal dollar I can possibly provide to those offices. Just like you, I live in this community, I'm raising my kids in this community, and all we want is for this place to be a little better maybe than it was yesterday. So as long as I'm here, the federal funding piece is big for our office, and I'm going to help support Hiller, the Baton Rouge Police Department, the EBR Sheriff's Office, and every other local and state law enforcement agency who wants some federal assistance. So let's talk a bit about federal gun crimes. What are we doing in that area? Simply put, we want to prosecute the best federal violations of federal gun crimes. It's easily said. We do it in two different ways. One is sort of a long game approach, which I'll touch on. It's our violent crime strike force. The strike force is essentially another partnership among federal agencies and state and local agencies, where we look at, with the help primarily of the state and local agencies, frankly, we look at who are our most dangerous offenders, who are, if they are organized in little loose groups or perhaps better organized groups, who are they, who's the most dangerous groups, and who's the most dangerous among those groups. We identify them, we divide them into sort of subsections, and we place federal, state, and local resources on those cases to build what we think are long-term investigations. Those are more historical type cases where we can take our time, really dig in deep, and do our best to either make one-off cases against individuals or preferably make larger cases on organizations or groups, irrespective of how loosely or tightly organized they may be. The partners in that endeavor, in the strike force, there are many. I'll just sort of rattle off the primary partners. It's obviously our office. The federal law enforcement presence is the ATF, the FBI, the DEA, and Homeland Security. Two of those groups, we split those into two, and they each handle, excuse me, they each handle a certain number of groups or gangs in our neighborhoods or in our areas. The DA's office is a critical partner here in East Baton Rouge. Hiller's, I'm sure you've heard him talk to you either as a group or individually about his crime strategies unit. Simply put, that's his intelligence-based unit that helps provide information not just to his office, but to our office, to federal law enforcement agents, to the sheriff, to the city police, to anybody who can use that data to help make better cases. The crime strategies unit, as he refers to it, the CSU, is an incredible piece of incredible law enforcement tool that we all use to help make these efforts a little more efficient. And when called upon, we can use the organized crime and gang section out of the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington. So that's our sort of our long game approach. That's where we can take our time, dig into these historical cases, and make what we hope to be bigger cases on some of these larger or some of these groups. What I like to refer to as our short game approach is Operation Joint Endeavor. Hiller touched on this in the introduction. It's really simple. It's really simple, and I wish I would have invented it because I could have bottled it, sold it, and we'd have a different conversation. It's just playing nice with others. That's all it is. In my short time as a U.S. attorney, it's been about 18 months. I've learned from some of my colleagues in other states that while in their former careers as prosecutors in other places, they've literally had to stop local sheriffs and local city police officers from arresting one another because they're fighting over who should have the crime scene. We play nice with others here. It's just that simple. So it's Operation Joint Endeavor is our short game approach to gun violence, and more correctly, illegal possessors of firearms. What it is, simply put, is just sort of quick time, and I use that phrase. It's not real time collaboration because that's really difficult to obtain a real time the conversation, but it's quick time collaboration on felons who illegally possess firearms in our district. The way it works is really simple. Tonight in East Baton Rouge Parish, somebody somewhere is probably going to get arrested for possessing a gun illegally. He or she is a convicted felon. They get arrested at maybe a routine traffic stop that leads to other things. A gun is confiscated, and the officer making the arrest recognizes that this person is a prohibited person, shouldn't be in possession of a firearm, so he arrests that person for a felony. So the way it works is an officer, and this is really simple stuff, but believe me, other folks aren't doing this. The officers generate a report, as we expect them to do, to the credit of the Baton Rouge Police Department and Hiller's office. That process has now evolved, and it's a quicker process than it's been in many years past. The officer generates a report. It then goes into a database. In years past, where it may have taken a little longer to maybe hit Hiller's desk or perhaps to hit my desk, now we're talking maybe not in real time, but quick time. Hiller will find out about that case, if not the same night, the next morning, as will representatives from my office, from the ATF, the Baton Rouge Police Department, and the EBR Sheriff's Office. Long ago, before this project, it was generally left to the individuals who either investigated the case or the assistant DA or assistant federal prosecutor who may prosecute the case. Now we've streamlined it. It's a much more efficient process where one point of contact from each office talks to each other every day. And if y'all know Hiller well enough, you'll know that he and I talk at 11 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we're doing this literally every day on these types of cases. And the objective is really simple. There are, while you may recognize the example of the officers trying to arrest each other at the crime scene, in this operation, under this administration, his administration, and the administration of the folks that are currently in place in our local law enforcement agencies, we check our egos at the door. Because all we care about is getting that felon who illegally possessed the gun into the right courtroom where he or she will get the quickest justice and have the best opportunity at a better sentence. We discuss those three things really quickly in the process, and then we make a decision. Where are we going to send it first? Either Hiller's office or mine, and either of us is happy with the outcome. If it goes to my office, Hiller and I will collaborate in terms of the progress of the case. And if Hiller so chooses, at the conclusion of that case in federal court, he can bring charges just as well as I can if he chooses to prosecute the case. But ordinarily, we're making decisions on the front end very quickly to identify who the most dangerous felons are possessing those firearms are, and then we make those decisions on where those cases go. It's worked tremendously well over the last several years. We've been, I think, a little more efficient in the last couple of years. Just last year, it was toward the end of the year, I think it was in December, the way the Department of Justice captures its statistics for the year is they take sort of what they call a snapshot on a given day towards the end of the year, and what your numbers are on that day is generally what they report. And it's usually a fair and accurate depiction of what your numbers are for the year. I'm very proud to say that last year, just in our office, our federal firearms prosecutions were up 104% over what they were in the aggregate of the prior 4 years, or the average of the prior 4 years, excuse me. I'm very proud of that. Our numbers look good this year as well, but for us, and I can speak for Hiller here, it's just not about the numbers. It's just about making a difference, putting the right folks where they need to be if they're possessing guns illegally, particularly the shooters, because as we all know, we've seen it far too many times, either on the news or in some sort of a press release, that a person convicted of a drug crime or a violent crime goes right back, and it's not all of them, but some go right back and they possess guns illegally for whatever reason, and those are the kind of folks we're really interested in. Under PSN, and just generally speaking, our philosophies are aligned in as much as we're not out here in our communities or in our district or our respective jurisdictions sending a message that we're here to round up folks off of every corner. We're looking for the most dangerous people in our communities. It makes a difference. You've heard the 10% rule. It's a reality. So we're not out here trying to round up everybody in a particular area or community or neighborhood. We're trying to identify for the people who live and work and play in those communities who the most dangerous folks are and make a difference by making meaningful prosecutions against them. Moving on, under the violent crime umbrella, still under PSN, is our organized crime drug enforcement task force. Simply put, those are our large-scale drug cases. That's probably the best and most concise way to put it. We've got the ability to label those cases as sort of an organized crime case if they meet certain criteria, which then triggers federal funding for those cases. Now, those cases could be federal cases. Most often they are. But almost equally often, those cases are generated from state leads, either by the DA's office, the city police, the sheriff, working in close collaboration with our federal agencies. So many times, the one-off drug dealer on the street corner, where it might normally be a state case, because we've got a conscientious police officer, narcotics detective, he makes a larger case of it, and ultimately, if we can tag that as an organized crime and drug enforcement task force case, we can bolster that investigation with federal funding and make a more meaningful prosecution. Just a couple of quick examples of that. Last year was about a month after we arrived. We announced an indictment of the largest indictment in terms of number of defendants for a drug trafficking organization in our district. We indicted 42 defendants for some large-scale drug trafficking activities in this district and in other places. About half of those have been adjudicated, either pled guilty, or most of the 21 have pled guilty, so we're still picking off the remainder. Another interesting case was Operation Third World. It's a little older, so we're closer to conclusion. 39 defendants were indicted. 35 of them are already found guilty. The ringleader in that case was sentenced to life in prison, and many of the other top-tier operators in that organization were sentenced to very significant federal prison sentences. We announced, in fact, just yesterday, the unsealing of an indictment where 22 individuals were indicted for drug-related offenses arising in and outside of Angola State Penitentiary. It included inmates within the penitentiary, guards who were working at the time for Angola, and free people outside of the prison who were working in concert with drug distributors, allegedly to push drugs and other contraband into Angola. I can't say much more about that case, obviously, because we just unsealed the indictment and the litigation has just begun. But those are the kind of impactful cases that we can make on the federal level, which is what we're all too prepared to do. Just as a footnote to that, in the last 18 months, we've done, and this is cue the grunts and chagrin from Hiller. We've of the assistant U.S. attorneys in our office, I've hired 40% of them in the last probably 14 months. Hiller was generous enough to allow a couple of his former all-stars to come to work for us. That's just one way to put it. But no, great credit to Hiller and his team for number one, obviously their partnerships, but for producing top caliber lawyers who you can rest assured is doing as much as they can on the state level to do the same, to create the same sort of results that we're trying to do on the federal level. And I can tell you, the folks that we've brought on board from Hiller's office, and he knows this because he was in the office a couple days ago. They're doing wonderful work. They're ahead of the curve in terms of learning the federal system, and they're doing a really good job. In addition to the sort of boots on the ground efforts, the investigations and the prosecutions, one of the things I wanted to bolster, which fortunately didn't need much more support, was our law enforcement training. One of the things we can do as federal prosecutors in our districts is to help local, state, and federal law enforcement agents and agencies better train their people. Now, on the one hand, you might think, well, why would you invest time and effort in doing that? Well, the obvious is, as I mentioned earlier, we want better informed and better educated law enforcement agents so they can make better cases for us and for their respective state DA's offices. But a more practical reason why we engage so deeply in this is because agencies like the Baton Rouge Police Department and the EBR Sheriff's Department, which are our two biggest in the Middle District, may have the funding and the resources to train their people a little better than perhaps maybe the Watson PD. So the people in Watson deserve no less in terms of the training of their folks than we do here in Baton Rouge. So what we do is we simply invite anybody who's interested to attend the trainings that we coordinate and that we run. And what we do is we find subject matter experts. I'm not going to teach a class on how to tactically enter a hazardous environment where chemicals have been spilled, but we find experts through the Department of Justice who will come down and teach that class. And we'll have as many people attend those classes as can. Just in the last year, we've trained over 1,600 state, local, and federal agents from 50 different agencies. Our law enforcement coordinator, we've got one person putting this all together, and she wears multiple hats, so she's to be commended for the job she does. She's incredibly invested in our law enforcement community. She works at our office every day, and she's always on the phone with some chief or some sheriff somewhere trying to train people. And if we're backed up in East Baton Rouge or in the Middle District, she's knocking on my door and she says, "Hey, I'm talking to the Western District and somebody in Acadia Parish wants some training. Would you authorize me to do it?" Yeah, go. So she's really invested in helping our law enforcement community become better at their jobs. The subject matter is really extensive. I could go on for 30 minutes telling you about the classes we teach. It's very extensive, and it starts with the very most basic tenets of law enforcement through some of the most complex issues that they'll face. Touched on grant funding earlier. As I said, it's extremely important to me personally and professionally in this role. As long as I'm here and as long as our partners want some federal money, I'm going to bend over backwards to figure out who in Washington has it and how they write the check and when they can send it to us. We've been really successful. Hiller and the local chief and sheriff have been extremely critical in that message. That we met last year with some folks from Washington who literally control the purse strings with respect to federal grant funding for local law enforcement. We made, I believe, this was they I believe thought enough of what we were doing to ask for a private meeting with us. We met with them, and I'm very pleased to say that we got some incredible results from it. Just last year alone, now this is statewide, just last year alone, the United States Department of Justice contributed $77.5 million to the state of Louisiana for many, many different programs. Because of our proximity in the Middle District to the state agencies in the state capital, 62 million of it went through the Middle District or Middle District agencies. Most of it goes to the state, through the state to state law enforcement agencies. But on a more grassroots level, and Hiller can tell you, just on 2 programs alone, for 2 agencies alone, Hiller's office and the Baton Rouge Police Department, we contributed over $1 million just for the purpose of 2 programs, and that's to bolster their technology efforts. If he hasn't told you once, I'm sure he's told you 1,000 times. He's trying desperately, along with the chief and the sheriff, to bolster their tech efforts in data collection and analysis in order to help support their law enforcement activities. It's critical because I'm sure there are some tech folks in the room. This stuff evolves as fast as you can possibly imagine, faster than I can certainly imagine. This is the story of coding. This is above my head, okay? So I'm gonna tell you right now, this stuff evolves quickly, and we want to help them, and that's where a lot of that money went, was to help bolster Hiller's Crime Strategies Unit, the Crime Gun Intelligence Center, which is making tremendous progress, and other tech efforts. Another issue that Hiller touched on, and I'll have to go quickly, is the public safety partnership. Now, if I could ask 100 or so folks to please keep a secret, tomorrow we will be announcing that Baton Rouge has been selected as an operational site for the Public Safety Partnership, which is a national endeavor started 2 years ago in June 2017 by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He got an order from the president. It was very simple. He said, "General, I need you to reduce violent crime in America. Go figure it out." So General Sessions started some engagement with local, federal, and state law enforcement folks to identify 12 of the most dangerous cities in America. They made those cities operational and started the Public Safety Partnership. It basically provides a framework to enhance already existing law enforcement efforts and make those efforts better and sort of tie those efforts together and provides best practices and training. In 2017 in June, when they named those operational cities, they also named, I think it was 10 or perhaps a dozen diagnostic cities, which were cities that they needed to keep an eye on because the numbers were not great in terms of violent crime. I'll give you one guess which city was on that list of diagnostic cities. It was Baton Rouge. So while it's a little bittersweet that we have to be on a list, I am encouraged greatly by the fact that the Attorney General has recognized that Baton Rouge could use some federal resources, additional federal resources, meaning in addition to all the money and resources that we've been pumping in over the last 18 months. So that announcement will be formally made tomorrow. We've got some folks from DOJ coming down, and we'll be holding a press conference to more formally announce that. I think it's going to be great for our office, for the offices of the local law enforcement folks that you all know, and great for our efforts. It just provides training that maybe they wouldn't have had or that they couldn't have afforded without some assistance from the DOJ. It's a 3-year commitment. So it's not something like the department comes in, they don't like what they see and they walk away. We've got a 3-year commitment from them on this, irrespective of who sits in my seat. So that's obviously a bonus. I'm very pleased to tell you that we've already started our efforts with respect to where our focus should be. We know that, the obvious is homicides. Nobody wants another homicide in our communities. We're going to also focus on non-fatal shootings, which is equally serious because every non-fatal shooting is one either act of God or perhaps science away from being another homicide. They should be taken incredibly seriously. Another important area of focus where we're going to concentrate for the Public Safety Partnership is, as I've talked about before, is the tech efforts already in place by Hiller's office, the chief and the sheriff, to find the data. It's out there. Any of the tech folks in the room will tell you data's everywhere. We just got to figure out how to capture it, and more importantly, probably how to use it. Again, don't take my word for it because this is, but how to use it, right? We want to know how that data can help us identify those most dangerous offenders so that we can bolster those already in place efforts that we think are already doing a pretty good job. Quickly, I think I'm running close. Quickly, Hiller's office, myself, the chief, and a couple of others last year went to a Project Safe Neighborhoods conference where we had that private conversation with the grant folks. We attended, we very strategically mapped out which among the several breakout sessions were important to our district, and we sort of did the divide and conquer method. You know, Hiller's office went to one class, I went to another, et cetera. And what we all found when we rallied at the end of the day to compare notes was that virtually every best practice that the federal government and experts from all over the country, from state and federal law enforcement agencies, suggested we implement, we were already either in the implementation phase or in the exploratory phase. So we're already doing it. What we need and what we're going to get, and he and I will see to it, is that we tie it together. How can we most efficiently tie together our already really robust efforts to make those kind of results that we all want? Look, the goal for me is really simple. It's to ensure under any circumstance that justice is done and the right outcome is achieved. We're going to do as much as we can to see that through. I cannot tell you, I would talk behind Hiller's back if he wasn't here, the chief, the sheriff. Our partnerships here are incredible. That's one of the biggest impediments in other districts, and we just don't have it. We've got people willing to share every day. We're doing it every day, and it's because I think everybody to a person in these kind of positions here, at least the folks that I'm dealing with, we do it because we know you deserve it, your communities deserve it, every community in the district deserves it, and your tax dollars are so important that we want to put them to work efficiently and effectively so that at the end of the day, not some statistician in Washington can tell me that I did a good job, but that some lady who maybe lives in a tough neighborhood after work can maybe let her 7-year-old girl ride her bike down the sidewalk where maybe before she couldn't. For me, that's a real result. Stats be damned. That's a real result. That's what we're shooting for, and we're going to do that every day. I can't tell you how much I appreciate having the opportunity to be here. I hope I lived up to Coach O's already lofty feats. But look, I thank you again. I want to thank the Rotary Club again for having me. I appreciate all that you do for our communities. And if there's anything, and Hiller would tell you, if there's anything you think we can do, call us. We're willing to listen. Thank you.
I think we have time for maybe about 1 or 2 questions. Michelle?
How do y'all decide which of you should do the case?
The gun cases?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good question. The question was how does Hiller's office and my office decide who's going to handle the case? Most important to every criminal case, it's really simple. It's 2 things. It's the facts and the law. Right? We have to make sure that the facts fit the law, and if there's no violation, there's no case, right? So what we do is we have a discussion about those 2 things very simply. What happened? How easy or difficult might it be to prove? Obviously, the first question for us is there a federal nexus? Is there a federal connection? If no, then it just automatically goes to Hiller's office. If there is a federal connection, then we engage a little deeper. We talk about the facts. We talk about whether the strength of the evidence, because sometimes you can quickly read an initial police report and learn that there may be some issue with perhaps a legal issue or an evidentiary issue that would preclude either office or maybe one or the other from taking the case. But what we do simply, it goes back to what I said a little earlier. We just want to know among which office or between which office it makes more sense to send it to. And that's because we want a quick result, a sure result, and a tougher sentence. And if we can do that, if we can answer those questions, then we have our answer. And we usually get to it pretty quickly, sometimes within a couple of days of the incident. Did that answer your question?
Well, I'm just curious, I don't know what a federal connection would be.
Sure. So in the federal firearms cases, there are several different types of federal firearms violations. The one that we most commonly prosecute is because it most commonly occurs is the felon in possession of a firearm. There's almost always going to be a federal connection in those kinds of cases. And the federal connection there, one of the elements of the crime that we have to prove is that the firearm possessed had traveled in interstate commerce. Therein lies the federal connection. Because there are virtually no firearms, or many firearms are not manufactured in Louisiana, they necessarily traveled in interstate commerce to get here, and then that there is your connection. Man, we should have had this at the beginning.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.